All right, well, welcome everybody. It is the top of the hour. We're going to get started with our webinar. We want to be able to get you through this and get on with the rest of your day as quickly as possible. Welcome. This is the update from the Appraisal Foundation, the Appraisal Standards Board, and the Appraiser Qualifications Board. My name is John Brennan. I am the Vice President of Appraisal Issues with the Appraisal Foundation. And first and foremost, I just want to say, in these difficult times that we're in, I want to give wishes that everyone is healthy and staying as safe as possible, and just wishing you all the very best. So, with that, let's get started. What you're going to hear, as I mentioned, updates from Dave Bunton, the President of the Foundation, and as well as Wayne Miller, the Chair of the Appraisal Standards Board, and Mark Lewis, the Chair of the Appraiser Qualifications Board. We're going to provide these updates, and we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. It's going to be a bit of a challenge because we do have a rather large audience today. So if you're unable to get your question answered, we apologize in advance. It's just a matter of logistics and being able to answer all the questions. What you'll want to do to ask a question is to use the chat feature. That's how we read your questions, and that's how we're able to provide answers. And you can use the chat feature by scrolling down to the bottom of your screen, and a menu will pop up showing the chat box feature. Or alternatively, you can simply use the keyboard shortcut Alt-H, and that will bring up the chat window. And even if you're not planning to ask a question, you'll want to enable this chat box, because there will be links to the information that we're talking about today. That's the basis for our presentation, as well as a link to a PDF of today's presentation as well. As usual, I want to thank Aida Dadayach, who is hard at work behind the scenes helping out with the chat box and the links in today's presentation. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be asked to complete a brief survey, and it is a brief survey, but we would absolutely appreciate your filling it out, because we want to make these as relevant as possible and do the best job we can for information. Lastly, we will be recording this webinar and placing it on the Appraisal Foundation website, as well as our YouTube channel. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to get started by introducing the President of the Appraisal Foundation, Dave Bunton.
John, thank you very much, and I echo your comments about the safety of all of us today. One sort of side effect of the coronavirus is that it has brought the profession together. Over the past couple weeks, there have been numerous conference calls and webinars and entities working together and sharing information. And actually earlier this week, there was a webinar put on by the Massachusetts Board of Real Estate Appraisers, the Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, ASA, IAAO, and the Appraisal Institute. And I just want to tip my hat to them. It was extremely professionally done and also very, very informative. Regarding here at the Foundation, we have established a dedicated webpage at appraisalfoundation.org. It's located, you can access it right on our homepage. It's a great resource. Anything that we have found related to the coronavirus and valuation has been posted there. Whenever possible, we have posted it as a link. So as the issuers of the guidance update their guidance, it'll automatically be updated on our website as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that on our homepage. Other impacts of the virus on the Foundation: our headquarters is closed, but all of our staff are teleworking. All of our staff can be contacted using the same contact information that you would normally use. And our order fulfillment center remains open to assist you if needed. Some of you may be aware we do state investigator training. It's a joint project of the Association of Appraiser Regulatory Officials and the Foundation, pardon me, and it's funded by the Appraisal Subcommittee. We have canceled those sessions for this year. We'll take another look in the fourth quarter. We may do what's referred to as a level 1 session at that time if the situation warrants it. We have a lot of meetings at the Foundation. Our boards and advisory councils, some are being canceled, Some are being postponed, and some are going to be held virtually. And I think Mark and Wayne will talk about that in a little more detail. The ASB and AQB meetings, even if they're virtual, we will still live stream them, so you'll be able to observe them. We have an events page on our website. We keep it very current. I would urge you to take a look at that before you decide to participate in any one of our meetings. At some point in the future, hopefully things are going to return to normal. And when they do, I think a topic of discussion is going to be a study by the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. That is the investigative and audit arm of the US Congress. A few months ago, we contacted some key members of Congress, urging them to request a GAO study of Title 11 of FIREA. Specifically, take a look at it, what it looked like when it was enacted and what it looks like today. For instance, the numerous increase in the thresholds, the 13 regulatory carve-outs that the banking agencies have issued, the ASC waiver of last year. So now 90% of real estate transactions are not federal-related transactions, which is just about the complete opposite of what it was when Title 11 was enacted 30 years ago. The Appraisal Foundation participated in 2 previous GAO studies on the appraisal regulatory system. We did so in May of 2003 and then January of 2012. Both of those resulted in several recommendations on the operations of the appraisal subcommittee. These studies entail extensive interviews of stakeholders. They will interview regulators, practitioners, association representatives, and they're very comprehensive, very data-driven, and they always offer recommendations. And these GAO recommendations very often form the basis for corrective legislation going forward. Unlike a lot of things in Washington, D.C., the GAO is not politicized. It is fair, impartial, and objective, and held in very, very high regard by the Congress. Excuse me. In closing, I just want to mention a transition that we're having at the foundation staff. For the past 16 years, John Brennan has been the technical face of the foundation, if you will, as our vice president of appraisal issues. John recently received a handsome offer from the corporate world, and he's going to be departing the foundation next Tuesday, April 7th. I just want to thank John for his exemplary service. He's been an outstanding staff member, and he'll be greatly missed, both as a colleague of mine, but also as a friend. I would also like to welcome Lisa Damaris. Lisa has been appraising real estate for the past 25 years in Colorado. For the past 6 years, she has served on foundation boards. She served on the Appraisal Practices Board for 3 years, and has been completing 3 years of service on the Appraisal Standards Board. She also previously served as an investigator and review appraiser for the Colorado Appraiser Regulatory Agency. She possesses a great skill set. She has the combination of technical knowledge, excellent writing abilities, a good public speaker, and very sound judgment. So Lisa is a great addition to our team, and we welcome you. With that, John, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. It's been my honor to work with the foundation, and I certainly appreciate it and your kind comments. And I know that I'm leaving you in good hands with Lisa. Lisa's terrific, and she won't miss a beat. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about our board's updates, and let's get started with Mr. Wayne Miller from the Appraisal Standards Board. Wayne, you've got a few things you'd like to say, right?
I would, John, thank you. And I echo your comments and Dave's, and I certainly hope everyone participating on the call today and their loved ones are well and healthy and stay that way. You know, these are challenging times, and as we all attempt to adjust to a new normal that frankly changes every day, I'm here to tell you, what the Standards Board is doing to assist appraisers, users of appraisal services, and regulators in the short term and in the long term. And first off, John, I have to say that the flexibility of USPAP is really on display right now. Remember, the underpinnings of USPAP call for appraisers to be ethical and competent and develop credible assignment results using recognized methods and techniques, and provide a report that's meaningful and not misleading to the client and intended users and to keep good records. So that said, over the past 3 weeks, the ASB has adopted 3 Q&As that address issues that have been brought to the forefront during this COVID-19 health crisis. The first of these deals with inspections of real property. And this Q&A was developed early on in the crisis when the ASB began to receive questions from appraisers and users of appraisal services and other stakeholders asking whether appraisers must continue to perform interior inspections during the health crisis in order to comply with USPAP. And the answer to this Q&A, is posted on the screen here, reminds everyone to follow the guidance of public health entities such as the CDC and the WHO, and to follow any state and municipal orders which may restrict access or movement. And further, the Q&A reminds us that USPAP does not require an appraiser to perform a personal inspection of the subject. USPAP is written this way to allow appraisals to be completed in situations where an inspection is not possible, such as where the subject property improvements are proposed, or a retrospective valuation of a property can be completed where the building was destroyed, say, by fire or some other natural disaster. In both cases, the improvements do not physically exist, so they can't be inspected. Well, today, with restrictions on movement and concerns over the potential to contract or spread the coronavirus, an interior or even an exterior inspection may not be possible for some properties. So now what? Remember, USPAP does not require an inspection, but USPAP does require that the appraisal report contain information sufficient to identify the real estate involved in the appraisal, including the property's physical characteristics. Therefore, if the scope of work would normally include an interior inspection, and the assignment conditions are such that one is not possible, the appraiser must use other methods to identify the subject property. The key issue to remember is that if an appraiser cannot adequately describe the subject's physical property characteristics and cannot produce credible assignment results, the appraiser should withdraw from the assignment. Now, some folks are getting creative and they're using other methods to identify the subject property's physical characteristics, including examination of surveys and floor plans and building plans and renderings, looking at other professionals' reports, exhibits, photographs or video taken by others, interviews with individuals, public records information, listing information, offering memoranda or other sources. I'd just like to remind folks to review Advisory Opinion 2, which contains some additional information about personal inspections, including information on an appraiser's responsibilities when relying upon an inspection provided by someone else. That's what I got on that one, John. So the next Q&A deals with some guidance. I'm sorry, this one is on the limitations of personal property. We switched up the order a little bit here. So this Q&A deals with limitations on inspections of personal property during the health crisis. And in many ways, this guidance parallels the guidance for real property. Of course, appraisers should be safe and follow the law and do what is necessary to describe the subject property. And the gist of this Q&A is that it may be possible to sufficiently identify the subject property's physical characteristics if the assignment conditions don't allow for personal inspection. However, getting back to our main goal here, if the appraiser cannot produce credible assignment results without an inspection, and you can't arrange an inspection, then the appraiser has no choice but to withdraw from the assignment.
Wayne, before we go to the next question, I just want to point out one quick thing, because it says it in the response to both this question and the last one on the real property side. It says that the appraiser, that it may require an appraiser to make an extraordinary assumption. And one of the things that I've heard a lot is appraisers saying that USPAP would require them to make an extraordinary assumption. And I just want to make it clear, USPAP does not make any such requirements. And the question of whether an extraordinary assumption is necessary or not is up to the appraiser and the assignment conditions, as well as the availability of information. So I just want to make that clear because there's been a lot of questions about that.
Well, you're absolutely right, John. You know, folks shouldn't hide behind an extraordinary assumption, but if an appraiser feels like one is necessary, even after gathering all of the information that they can, and they make that determination, they can still proceed with the assignment. They have the option to employ an extraordinary assumption.
Thank you.
Sure. So the other Q&A that we have here deals with the guidance that was put forth by the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie and Freddie, last week. I think it was still just last week, allowing modifications to fixed appraisal form reports. So the question posed to the ASB was whether by simply following this guidance, an appraiser would produce a misleading report. Before I dig into the nuts and bolts of the answer here, I do want to give a shout out to my board on the rapid response on this Q&A. And we knew this was a very important issue, and actually we adopted this Q&A within 24 hours of the GSEs putting out their guidance. So I do appreciate the hard work that the board put in. So in talking about this, first off, let's remember that appraisers comply with USPAP and forms don't. So in a nutshell, the GSE's guidance allows for the modification of the scope of work, assumptions and limiting conditions, and the certification to allow for exterior only or desktop appraisals. Now that's while using a fixed form report that is designed for interior and exterior inspections. And the guidance includes specific instructions prohibiting modification of those forms. So they're not the guidance, but those forms actually, require that you not modify them. So this temporary guidance says, okay, if you use what we ask you to use or we suggest that you use, you can modify the unmodifiable forms. So in looking at this, since the financial institutions who order these appraisal reports have been informed of the GSE's modifications to the guidance, the use of the specifically authorized replacement language by an appraiser does not in and of itself result in a misleading appraisal report. That's the view of the board. And I will say this, the agencies, HUD and VA and the USDA have also issued guidance which in many ways parallels this GSE guidance. It's our view at this time that this Q&A should be viewed as applying to the spirit of those agencies' guidance as well, while we have not gone back to modify this Q&A or develop another Q&A involving those supplemental guidelines from the agencies. It's our view that you can extrapolate a little bit from this Q&A that would apply as well.
Great. Thank you, Wayne.
Sure.
So that's kind of the guidance that the ASB has issued. How about talking to us about what the ASB is looking at right now with potential changes to USPAP?
Sure. But before I jump into that, let me say there is some other work we've got going on. We'll certainly consider any other crisis-related guidance as issues arise. And we do have a few non-coronavirus items in the hopper right now in terms of Q&As. We're going to wait a little bit until things calm down before issuing them, rather than have folks assume that they are coronavirus related. We thought now would not be a good time to issue them. So, okay, getting back to the business of the ASB. So beyond coronavirus, today's meeting was supposed to be an ASB public meeting in San Antonio, Texas, and we would have had a much more robust discussion of the various elements of the first exposure draft of potential changes to USPAP for the future. First off, let me say that we have pushed off the comment deadline on this until April 30th. Normally, we have a comment deadline that that immediately precedes our meetings. I think our deadline was to have been late last week or early this week. We're pushing that out to give folks some time to review the exposure draft and to forward their comments and suggestions. I'm not going to, if you back up one, I'm not going to read the slides to everyone verbatim, but the ASB continues to consider evolutionary changes to USPAP to keep USPAP relevant, and while we continue to stay focused on public trust. So the issues on which we're seeking feedback include the impact of technology on appraisals, the current requirement for specific report labels, and the possibility of a single set of minimum reporting standards, the nature and disclosure of a personal inspection by the appraiser, something that is somewhat coronavirus related these days, disclosure of the appraiser's reliance upon significant assistance, whether that's provided by other appraisers or other professionals, and some potential changes to definitions. So the specific sections that we're looking at for potential changes include the reporting standards, which are 2, 8, and 10, the scope of work rule, and definitions, as well as some other edits to improve clarity. So John, as you know, you and I delivered a webinar about the content of the first exposure draft on February 27th, although it does feel like it was much longer ago. Folks, if they're interested, can listen to the webinar. It's available on the Appraisal Foundation YouTube channel. They can download the exposure draft from the Appraisal Foundation website, and I believe if all has gone as planned, Aida has posted links in the chat box. So our next meeting, the ASB, is planned for July 10th. It's currently planned to be held in Torrance, California live. However, that meeting may be a virtual meeting depending upon the lingering effects of the current health crisis. So, okay, with the formal business of the ASB out of the way, I personally, and on behalf of current and past ASB members, I need to take an opportunity to acknowledge John Brennan for his many, many years of outstanding service to the appraisal profession, the foundation, and its boards. I met John in 2006 when I was an SME for the inaugural Certified General Appraisal exam that was under development at the time, and he has been a fixture at every foundation function I have attended during my 14 years of service here. I will miss his wit, his wisdom, his guidance, and most of all, his friendship. But I wish him every success as he moves on to the next phase of his career. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge and congratulate Lisa Damaris, who's taking on this role. Lisa has served as a valuable member of the ASB since her appointment in 2018, and we will miss her as a board member. However, she's not going very far away, and we look forward to continuing to work with her as she assumes this new role. With that, John, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, Wayne, thank you. Very much appreciate those comments. And I will obviously miss working with the board and people like yourself very much. And hopefully, I know that Lisa will step right in. But again, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. With that, why don't we move on to Mr. Mark Lewis, the chair of the AQB. And I think that, Mark, you've got a couple of things you want to talk about, don't you?
Absolutely. Thanks, John. And I guess I'll, on the front end of my comments, let me just recognize John. We really appreciate the depth of knowledge and the 16 plus years that you've served the appraisal profession with the Appraisal Foundation. Me personally, I'll miss your friendship, and I hope certainly that we will cross paths over the next coming years. And again, welcome to Lisa. Welcome to the fire. This is a tough time to take over John's position, but I'm sure you'll do well. As noted in the chat box, there is a link there to a guidance letter that AQB sent to the appraisal subcommittee. A link can also be found on the Appraisal Foundation's website under that Coronavirus and Appraisers tab. But the AQB has focused on two areas of the criteria which would directly impact appraisers, regulators, and providers. The first area of concern is for existing appraisers who need continuing education classes, and then that would dovetail into the second area of concern, which involves license and certification renewals. I'll address each of those separately. The first area of concern is for those continuing education classes which were approved for classroom delivery. And now, because of the national emergency, those in-person classroom sessions can't be held in person. For those continuing education offerings, AQB has recommended the ASC exercise discretion by allowing those continuing education classes to be offered remotely via synchronous distance education delivery. That would be under conditions noted in the letter, and I'll walk through those conditions. They're fairly simple. But the first condition would be that we would recommend the education offering under consideration for synchronous delivery is currently approved for traditional classroom presentation, and then of necessity needs to be converted over into synchronous. In regard to synchronous education, the platform utilized for that distance education needs to be live and interactive. And by that we mean students need to see the instructor and the instructor needs to see the students. And also there needs to be some type of interaction, whether that be a live question and answer periods, or whether that's chat rooms or other types of interaction. You know, folks need to be creative here. Webcams are great. We've been getting lessons on how to use those productively, and I think we can do those in this synchronous type of environment. The third area of consideration is that if you're going to convert from a classroom to synchronous delivery, the instructor still needs to verify with a photo identification the students. If the students are worried about their personal IDs being put on camera for everyone to see, or emailed to instructor to retain, you know, it would be fairly simple to just either put a piece of tape over the ID number or cross it out in an email. But the main thing that we're concerned about, or we're recommending, is that the picture on the ID matched the name of the person sitting in the chair taking the education. So that's the important thing. And then the fourth thing, as with CE, is there is a requirement that there be 100% classroom attendance. So the instructor is going to need to maintain an attendance roster to verify that 100% attendance. Now this can be accomplished in several ways, but one might just be taking attendance at various times during the offering. This is no different than an in-person classroom where you would send around a sign-in sheet, maybe in the morning, in the afternoon, and make sure that folks are still in attendance. What we want to guard against is that we want to verify that students just don't turn on their webcam and then walk away. But this is a continuing education class, and 100% attendance is required. Now, it must be clearly understood that this guidance that AQB has provided to ASC only relates to continuing education. At this time, there's no changes being considered for qualifying education or for the license or certification examinations. Now, we are aware that in regard to the examinations, that testing centers have been closing during this time period, and I can understand why. And we understand that this will be an inconvenience and interrupt the progress of folks in the pipeline to become licensed or certified. But at this time, in the interest of public trust, the AQB considers qualifying education and examination a baseline must, which that will include testing. And without those testing centers, it's going to be tough to do that. But at this time, there's no changes being considered for qualifying education. Now, a common question that AQB has received is, do these recommendations for continuing education, do they apply to the 7-hour USPAP class and to the state trainee supervisor course? And the answer is yes, they do. So those classes could be converted, or we're recommending that they could be converted into synchronous delivery methods. Now, the second area of concern is for existing license and certification renewals. As noted in the letter to ASC, there is already a provision in the criteria which allows for a 90-day extension for appraisers impacted by state or federally declared disasters. In the AQB's opinion, this declared national emergency related to the COVID-19 virus would constitute a similar event. So there's already a section in the criteria to allow for a 90-day extension. The AQB has gone further and has encouraged the ASC to use its discretion to permit rolling 90-day extensions as needed during this crisis period. As always, the AQB is doing our best to be as responsive as possible to questions which may arise. This is uncharted territories for all of us, and we're doing our best to be as accommodating as possible while still maintaining that baseline of public trust. So that's what we are doing, John, right now with the national emergency at hand. And I guess we can go on if we need to. About upcoming items. Non-COVID-19 related things that are still in AQB's hopper is on March the 10th, we had a focus group meeting related to that PREA project we've been working on for so long. PREA standing for Practical Applications of Real Estate Appraisers. The purpose of that project is to perhaps look at an alternative to the traditional supervisor trainee method of delivering experience that we have in place today. The focus group was very productive, and I think you should probably look for some more information in the way of a second exposure draft in the next weeks and months ahead. Also, we do have an exposure draft out right now that is related to the licensed residential classification and their scope of work. That exposure draft is relatively simple, and it addresses a part of the criteria which says that a licensed residential real property appraiser classification applies to appraisals of non-complex 1 to 4 residential units having a transaction value less than $1 million, and complex 1 to 4 residential units having transaction values less than $250,000. Well, the bottom part of that de minimis has changed to $400,000, and essentially the exposure draft makes that change and mirrors the change in the de minimis. There's also some change to Guide Note 3 that is proposed, and you should look for a second exposure draft coming out here in the next few weeks that further clarifies the proposed changes. The AQB was planning on meeting on May the 15th in New Orleans. We will continue to have a virtual meeting on May the 15th. and we will live stream that meeting, at which time we will give you an update on all things AQB at that time. But that will be a virtual meeting. We are looking at maybe changing the time to a little more convenient rather than being at 9 a.m. Central in New Orleans. So I hope you'll tune in for that meeting on May the 15th. And I think, John, that pretty well wraps up my presentation. And again, I can't say enough how much we appreciate your efforts in guiding us for the last 16 plus years. And we wish you luck in your new assignment, and welcome Lisa on board. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mark. Again, you know, I'm overwhelmed with the kindness here. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and it has been great for me. And I wish everybody nothing but success moving forward. We're going to get started with some questions at this point. As you might imagine, we have a large audience online, and we have a lot of questions. And there's a couple of them that have kind of, as I've seen scroll through the chat box, been kind of frequent. And Mark, you were just talking about the AQB's encouragement to the ASC as far as regulatory discretion. One of the questions that I see coming up in the chat box pretty frequently here is, with this guidance, with this encouragement that the AQB is giving to the ASC, we listed those items that would need to be considered to take a continuing education course that is currently approved for a classroom and allow it to be offered in a synchronous manner. One of the questions that has come up is, will the instructor of that course need to possess the IDEC distance education certification credential that we currently require for distance education courses? And my thoughts, since it's not one of those 4 bulleted items, that would not be something that the AQB is making a stipulation. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and to see if you concur.
I do concur with that. No, this is unusual times, so we would recommend ASC exercise discretion over that and allow an instructor to conduct that continuing education class without IDEC approval.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. There's another question that's come up a number of times, and Wayne, I'll ask you to weigh in just at the end here. But the question is that we've heard a lot even before this webinar: are appraisers considered essential? Are appraisals considered essential services? And I will say this, that there's been recent guidance from CISA on this that seems to suggest pretty clearly that appraisals, real estate activities, including appraisals, would be included as part of the banking and financial sector, and that appraisers would be considered an essential service. But, and this is a big but, states ultimately are the ones who have these stay-at-home orders, and states may vary and may not necessarily either follow the CISA guidance or may have their own that they think, for whatever reason, they're more strict on it. So we can't come out and say that based on the CISA guidance, yes, appraisers absolutely can do this, because if a state feels differently and decides they want to throw appraisers in jail because they're violating their laws, you know, that's something you have to be aware of. So even though this guidance does appear to suggest that appraisers are allowed to and are considered essential services, we can't give you legal advice or legal guidance that is in fact the case in your jurisdiction, your state, your county, or your town. Wayne, is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
Just that in some states, I want to say Pennsylvania was one of the early states where they specifically did identify appraisers, I believe, as essential workers. So as you mentioned, John, this is well beyond a USPAP or an appraisal foundation matter. We can't advise appraisers that they are or they are not. By the same token, the initial question on interior inspections was, could the ASB waive interior inspections? And well, no, we can't. So appraisers need to understand what the laws of their state says in terms of, or their municipality says about their any restrictions on their movement or their actions.
Thank you, Wayne. Mark, we'll throw another one back your way. We've discussed this, so I know you're familiar with the topic, but one of the questions we see here has to do with the online courses, such as the 15-hour courses that require a proctor because they're distance education courses, and they require a proctor to administer the exam. And there are certain understandings out there that the AQB has specific requirements for these proctors, and I think that a lot of those requirements may be either the education provider specific or maybe state specific. But could you just real quickly address what the AQB requires as far as a proctor for a distance education exam?
Sure. The criteria addresses this under section 3, item E7. The criteria says that distance education courses intended as qualifying education must include a written closed book final exam. And then the parenthetical, it says that it needs to be proctored by an official approved by the college or university or by the sponsoring organization. So that's the criteria regarding that. So as long as you have a proctor that is approved by either the college or university or the organization, then that would satisfy the exam requirement for QE classes. But it does need to be a closed book final.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. We've got another question, and this is really more about what Wayne talked about and kind of just the overriding concern about having someone, whether it be an appraiser or anyone else for that matter, come inside their house under this COVID-19, or appraisers being asked to go inside a house on COVID-19. And Wayne, I'm going to ask you in a second, but the underlying thing here is, folks, regardless of what the law says, regardless of what a client's asking you to do, if you feel that your health and your safety are at risk here, you need to do the right thing and say that that's what takes priority. And if that means that you turn down an assignment, if that means that a borrower can't proceed with an assignment because the type of loan that they have applied for will not allow for anything other than interior inspection, then those are decisions you have to make. And we certainly would not encourage you to risk your health, your safety at this time. And we understand that that can create financial impacts on everyone, but being safe and being healthy is the most important thing. Wayne, is there anything you want to add to that?
I had to unmute myself, John, but no, I fully support what you just said. And, fundamentally, bigger picture than just appraisal. Obviously, as a nation, as a world, we're trying to get ahead of the curve on this, and anything that you believe would put you at risk or put the occupant of a property at risk, you should mitigate against.
Great, thank you. There's a question asking about the status of the letter from the AQB to the ASC, and essentially the gist of the question is the ASC going to allow it? We don't have someone from the ASC on this webinar, but I can tell you that they have been very responsive and have indicated that they will look at this AQB encouragement and certainly work together to try to make things as reasonable as possible in this time frame and under these circumstances. Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll say that that I've had conversations with ASC officials, almost on a daily basis, not quite daily, but fairly close to daily, and they are working. We're working very closely together, and I think on the ASC website they have a letter to regulators that essentially mirrors what we were talking about here. So I think you can go on asc.gov and find that letter there to regulators, so you know exactly what they're intending.
Great, thank you. Wayne, we brought this up during your portion just a little bit, but there's questions about, some appraisers still feel that, they can't imagine doing an assignment if they don't do an interior inspection without using an extraordinary assumption. And we've heard, we've been on calls and we've talked with the GSEs, and the extraordinary assumption in terms of USPAP is when there's certain uncertainty about facts. The question comes down to when an appraiser uses MLS data or uses any type of data source, there's an assumption that that information is reliable and accurate. And appraisers, for example, do not use an extraordinary assumption in using that data. So the question kind of comes down to, well, if the information about the subject property is being provided through other means, whether it be a homeowner, whether it be old MLS pictures, whether it be something else, from the USPAP perspective, that does not mandate an extraordinary assumption, yet many appraisers feel that using that as a tool somehow provides them with extra security or extra comfort level. Can you touch on that for a minute, Wayne?
Yeah, I would say this, John, and we've had, as as someone who attends all of our meetings, we've had lots of discussions about requirements, right, for certain things, requirement to include an extraordinary assumption. So if USPAP says you are required to use an extraordinary assumption and you don't, well, then you have not performed consistent with USPAP. So the way it's written is you may use an extraordinary assumption. There are conditions for when you may use one, but it doesn't say you must use one. And that's as much to protect appraisers on the back end if they fail to use one because they feel like they have obtained enough information such that they don't have to use one. If it makes someone comfortable to use one, and fundamentally, you're performing an assignment for use by your client. If your client understands and agrees with the use of that extraordinary assumption and can use the product that you've produced, well, then if it gives you comfort, you can certainly use one.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Mark, there's another question applying to the AQB information, and it's asking, why does the ASC ultimately have to allow states to accept what the AQB is doing, as opposed to the AQB simply saying that we've changed the criteria? And so can you kind of illuminate, what's required to actually change the criteria and how that applies to the timeliness under this emergency?
Sure. Just a kind of a quick background of what the process here is. That AQB, we essentially write the rules for qualifications. The states adopt those rules, and then ASC enforces the rules. So that's kind of the process. In order to change the rules, which are outlined in the real property appraiser qualifications criteria, those rule changes have to go through an exposure period where we are allowing for public comment, and then the board votes for approval or to permanently change that criteria. So what we are doing here is we are recommending to the ASC. ASC has some discretionary issues there where they can actually grant the state some leeway, and that's what we are recommending ASC do. But the actual criteria has not changed here. The criteria is the same. We are just recommending to ASC to follow some recommendations on how to provide the states with that leeway during this period of time.
Right, and as you mentioned, the process to go through a criteria change in terms of officially proposing a change, putting it out for public comment, and then having it adopted and becoming effective is not one that you can do on the turn of a dime, and that's why the AQB is highly encouraging the ASC to give some leeway based on the conditions that were provided by Mark. So
That's correct.
Great clarification, thank you. Wayne, we've got another one for you. And this one actually refers to some of what the ASB has done previously. It says that FAQ 191 in USPAP indicates that viewing photos of a subject property does not constitute a personal inspection. And FAQ 226, by the way, thank you for reading our FAQs, further states that the use of drones also does not constitute a personal inspection, and it would be logical to conclude that viewing the interior of a property via mobile devices such as cell phones and tablets also does not meet the definition of a personal inspection. Therefore, in the scope of work and appraiser certification sections of the pre-printed GSE forms, and not necessarily the most recently updated ones, the terminology that is used is complete visual inspection. It does not say personal inspection. So that long-winded windup, the question for the purpose of USPAP, are these terms synonymous, or can one conduct a complete visual inspection using photos, drones, mobile devices, etc., then simply disclose that a personal inspection has not been performed when signing the GSE certification?
Well, that's a long question, John, and let's be clear that the inspection guidance, right, that we include in Advisory Opinion 2 and in the further guidance that's in the FAQs that were cited here still apply, right? So in a nutshell, if the appraiser didn't go to the property and only looked at photos, video, or other descriptive information, whether that's live cell phone footage or drone footage or what have you, then the appraiser did not make a personal inspection. Now, I personally, and full disclosure, I do not complete 10004, single family, single unit appraisal reports. However, I did look up the item number 2, which is the standard disclosure within that certification that says I performed a complete visual inspection of the interior and exterior areas of the subject property. So if we look at that in the context that the appraiser's job is to appropriately disclose the scope of work and not be misleading, and if the appraiser knows that the assignment requires an interior inspection by them, if they can't personally visit the property, then they shouldn't sign a certification that says that they performed a complete visual inspection. Interestingly, the GSE temporary guidance in those certifications for the exterior only and desktop, right? This is the replacement language. They do include the word personal. So for exterior only, it says, I performed a personal visual inspection of the exterior of the subject property. On the desktop only, it says, I did not perform a personal visual inspection of the subject property. Now, I don't want to second guess the GSEs, but I'm fairly sure that the inclusion of their standard language, I performed a complete visual inspection of the interior and exterior, is meant to parallel the USPAP requirement that it is a personal inspection by the appraiser on site inside the property.
And great, thank you for that, Wayne. And then, you know, the other question being too, in whatever the inspection is, the purpose is to collect information about the subject property, its physical characteristics. And the bottom line is there's more than one way to do that, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, as we addressed before, you know, some of the items, frankly, that I noted to be, if you will, creative items are items that people use every day. I think the creative part is, yes, we're trying to figure out how to rely upon whether it's a property owner or a broker or a property manager, maybe for a commercial property, or a tenant, providing, you know, visual representations, i.e. photos, video, etc., of the interior of a property in order to allow the process to continue and to have the appraisal be done such that an appraiser can describe the property's interior and ultimately come up with credible assignment results.
Great, thank you, Wayne. There are a number of questions relating to forms and which forms can be used and et cetera. And I again want to remind everyone that we do have those links on the website that has been placed in the chat box with all of the guidance from the GSEs, from all of the agencies. We would strongly encourage you to read through that and take a look at exactly what's expressed. You know, there are people that don't believe that the 1004 form, for example, should be used if they're not going inside the house, et cetera. Well, look at what the GSEs have said about that. That's something that that you need to get yourself familiar with if you're looking at doing those types of assignments. So please make yourself familiar with that. There's another question, and Mark, I'm going to say this one is for you, but it really isn't. It's one that you can say isn't our problem, but I'll let you say that. Someone has asked if the AQB is backlogged in giving approval to take their state license exam because they submitted their hours and completed their courses quite some time ago. So, Mark, you wanna tell in a nice way, say this isn't our issue?
Well, it's not our issue. It is a concern, but it's not our issue. Unfortunately, during this time period, you know, states process those applications at different rates, and unfortunately, during this time, they're even more backlogged because a lot of them are working at home, and so I mean, it's not a great time to be moving through the system and trying to get your license or certification, just because you know, the times is tough right now, and testing centers are closed. It's a very inconvenient time for those folks, and we understand that and are very sympathetic, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that from an AQB standpoint.
Yeah, well said. In fact, there are some state agencies that are closed and not even working from home. And so, as Mark very accurately put, you know, we're certainly sensitive to that, and we do understand that puts a real crimp in people's plans, particularly when they're looking to get a credential. But as Mark said, these are extraordinary times and things that we are not particularly have any control over whatsoever, and it requires patience on all of our parts. Mark, there's one more question that this will probably be our last year, that talks about pass rates on the exams, and that some in certain states and on certain exams appear to be lower than maybe nationals or for other credential levels. Can you just take a quick moment here and talk about, you know, how the AQB monitors, updates the exams and then monitors their performance?
Sure, and this has not gone unnoticed by AQB. We follow exam stats every month, that come out, and we monitor those very closely. And when we notice trends that are not typical, we certainly take notice and we start researching that. We have noticed a drop in pass rate for the certified general exam, and we are looking at that. I can tell you that the exam has not changed significantly over the last several years. So we are looking into, potential reasons for that drop. But right now, all we can tell you is that the exam hasn't changed. So now we do look at every year. In fact, we are in your email box for those stakeholders and appraisers, particularly in the next few weeks. You should see a survey in your box that is an occupational survey, and it will tell you it will ask you, what do you do on a regular basis? The results of that survey form the outline for the certification and licensing exams. That is very critical information that AQB needs, and we beg you to take the 20 minutes that it will take to fill that out and go through that questionnaire and answer those questions honestly. And if there is something in that exam that needs to be restructured, in other words, a process that was being done 5 years ago that's not being done today commonly by appraisers, then that's where we will restructure that exam, is off of that occupational survey. Subject matter experts will be meeting later on in the summer to work on the exam. And so this is a constant monitoring that AQB does every year. So we are well aware of it, and we are doing our research. So, but look for that occupational survey and please fill that out.
Great advice, Mark. With that, we've come to the end of our time. I would be remiss. I've seen several comments in the chat box wishing me well. Thank you. And we appreciate you joining us today, and we appreciate you continuing to do the best you can for our profession. So with that, we're going to sign off, and everyone be safe and be well. Thank you.